This is Mark chapter 2, verse 13 through 17. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners." You may be seated.
Amen. Thank you, PK and worship team. Well, good morning to you. It's so good to be with you today. If we have not met, my name is Nathan. I'm one of the pastors here at Central Heights. And whether you're joining us in person or online, it's such a gift to be with you today. Thanks, PK. About a year ago, a show came out on Netflix called Adolescence. Adolescence tells the story of a 13-year-old boy named Jamie who, through a series of events of personal loneliness, of some cyberbullying, of some stuff he was discovering online, ends up being radicalized to the point of murdering a fellow classmate. Adolescence was nominated for 13 Emmys and won 8. So impactful was Adolescence that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom actually called for it to be shown in schools across the nation. And here is, I think, why. What Adolescence puts its finger on is a world that is fearfully marked by more and more division, hostility, and loneliness. And the danger that comes, in fact, when those things start to become extreme and urgent. Today, what I would like to do is to bring you to Jesus, and specifically to the way in which his ministry seems to have an answer to a hostile, divided, and lonely world. This is the rabbi who gathered his disciples from one of the most eclectic bunches of people you could imagine. He had the tradesman of the fishermen. He had the accountant type of the money person, Judas. He had the zealot, the religious conservative in Simon. And he had Levi, the tax collector who was supporting the government, and in some ways many would have felt like he was betraying his people. This is the group that Jesus gathered around himself. Today, I think what Jesus will have for us is an answer to ministry for a lonely world. So to that end, I'd love to dig into our passage today. It is Mark chapter 2, starting at verse 13. We are going to be skipping over verses 1 to 12 just temporarily. Dave wanted to handle that at a later date. So if you have a Bible or a device, please turn with me to Mark chapter 2, starting at verse 13. It says this: "Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. 'Follow me,' Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him." Now, the first thing to take note is that this is very similar to a passage that's already shown up in Mark. In Mark 1, verses 16 to 20, Jesus calls some fishermen to follow him. There's actually 2 instances. So this is by now the 3rd time that we've seen Jesus approach someone, call them to follow him, and they do so right in that moment. Something else that was fascinating to me, though, as I prepared for this, is not just the parallel passage of Jesus finding someone and calling them to follow him, and they do so, but the fact that Mark always notes that it happens by a lake. Verse 13, once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. This is, unsurprisingly, the same thing that he says in chapter 1, because he's talking to some fishermen, so of course they're going to be by a lake. But Mark continually comes here. In fact, Mark frames many stories by this lake. So here is the lake. It is going to be on the screen here in a second, which, of course, those of you who've been around for a while know. We got a laser pointer. Yes. So right here on the right, this body of water is called Lake Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee. If you wanted to picture where Jerusalem was, kind of picture like the kick drum on the stage as a reference point for where Jerusalem would be. So we are in northern Israel at this point in time. And this seems to be where Mark wants us to note that Jesus came to time and time again. The next slide is going to show you every single instance that Mark notes Jesus was by this lake. In chapter 1:16, he calls fishermen as disciples. In the portion we just read, in chapter 2, he calls a tax collector as a disciple by the lake. In chapter 3, he will preach and heal and cast out demons, specifically by the lake, as Mark notes. At the start of chapter 4, it becomes the launching pad of his teaching ministry. At the end of chapter 4, it's the famous moment where Jesus is sleeping in the boat. The disciples are freaking out, and they wake him up, and he just calms the storm just by his words. In chapter 5, we start to see what Jesus will do a number of times is he will cross back and forth over this lake because it is a boundary marker between Jewish and Gentile territory. He goes back and forth between the two a number of times. Later on in chapter 5, he encounters a man who has multiple demons within him, casts them out into pigs, and the pigs then run into water and drown there. It's the story of Jesus not only overcoming spiritual darkness, but in the Jewish system, pigs were considered unclean, and so Jesus is also overcoming that uncleanness that David was talking about last week. In chapter 6, it's where Jesus wants to go to for rest and peace. Also in chapter 6, it's where he feeds 5,000 with just a couple of fish and loaves of bread. He walks on water in chapter 6 on that lake. And chapter 7, again, it's noted he heals a deaf and mute Gentile by the lake. Here is the point that Mark is trying to let you see. The lake, for whatever reason, was where Jesus wanted to do ministry. It was his ministry hub. Hear this, Jesus' ministry hub was by the sea, not the synagogue. Jesus, by the way, does go to the synagogue. He teaches there, he has conversations there, but note this, he didn't come to start a mega synagogue. He did not come to have some sort of teaching ministry that others would gather around him in this central location. There are multiple instances of Jesus teaching to thousands, but it's as he is going not to the synagogue, but to the sea. Note this. So I framed today as talking about loneliness, and instantly when we talk about loneliness, we're thinking about our relationships to one another. Many of us have an experience, though, not of loneliness only with one another, but with God himself. I think it's honestly the basic assumption. Some of you have a really deep feeling of this right now in a season of doubt or uncertainty of the presence of God. But for many and maybe most of us, our perception of where we meet with God is restricted to a Sunday service, devotionals in the morning if we do it, and maybe a time of prayer once or twice a week. I want you to know that Jesus' ministry hub is not just at the synagogue. It's not just at the places of religious institution. It's actually by the sea in everyday life. Some of you have actually set up expectations that would limit God's presence to meet with you in everyday life. Like when your dog is vomiting around your house because it ate some yogurt and now its stomach doesn't know what to do. When you're frantically trying to figure out what to do, Jesus actually would consider that type of environment his ministry hub. It's actually where he would like to go to work. When you're sitting around a propane fire tank, and it's always a propane fire tank because it's always too dry to have a real fire in your backyard. So when you're sitting around a propane fire tank with some friends, just enjoying the evening, that would be what Jesus would consider part of his ministry hub. When you haven't prayed in months, when you've just been trying to get through, God has been the furthest thing from your mind, maybe haven't even been showing up at church. Maybe this is your first time here in months. You actually are in one of the places still in your life. You've still been in Jesus' ministry hub. He likes to go to the sea. He still spends time in the synagogue, but he likes to go to the sea. He goes specifically, if you noted in verse 14, to a tax collector's booth. Levi, of all of the disciples, was the most controversial to include. The way taxes worked in Jesus' day was not through a government-run system that would give salaries and payments to people. Essentially, private contractors or organizations would bid to the Roman government about how much money they would pay. So they would commit to a certain amount of money that they would just give, whether it's monthly or annually or whatever, to the Roman government. And then it became their responsibility to come up with those funds by taxing people around the community, and it also became their responsibility to try and make money for themselves. They got no money. They just committed to paying Rome a certain amount of money. So you have Levi, a Jewish tax collector, who is considered to have betrayed his people because he has given his vocation to providing Rome with money off of the backs of Jewish labor. On top of that, he is skimming the top of the money to provide for himself. Jesus does not wait for Levi to come to the synagogue to tell him to follow him. Jesus goes to the tax collector's booth and says, "Follow me." He goes to the sea, not just the synagogue. Now, some of you are hearing this and thinking like, great, like you're already making plans to skip church next week and be at Cultus. Like, this is where Jesus would be. He's going to the lake, right? I mean, let's be honest. Next weekend is May long anyways. You're probably going to have more peace and rest here in church than you would at Cultus Lake. Like trying to get there on the rows, it'll be pure chaos. No, the point is not about going to a literal physical lake. The point is saying, where is the everyday life, the marketplace environments, the commerce environments that Jesus' ministry was set up? Let me give you 4 categories. Jesus was going to the places where people lived, learned, worked, and played. Live, learn, work, and play. This is where Jesus' ministry hub was. So if we think about that in our context, it's not just Cultus. I confess it could be Cultus, but it's not just Cultus. It's where we live. It's our neighbors. It's our complexes. It's our apartments. This is the kind of environment where Jesus would want to do ministry. It's where we learn. It's where you go to school with your classmates. That is the kind of environment that Jesus would consider a ministry hub. It's where you work, your coworkers, your relationships that you're building with people in like most of your waking hours if you're working. That is Jesus' ministry hub. It's where you play. It's your basketball team. It's your music, your band. Like it's these environments, the hobbies that you do with others. This was Jesus' ministry hub. So the question is, can we actually allow those things to become our ministry hubs too? That we would not wait for a synagogue to be able to accomplish the work of ministry, but we, being the actual active hands and feet of Jesus, would go and minister to a lonely, divided world in the environments where our world is already meeting. Would we minister not just in the synagogue, but by the sea? The question is how, and I think in verse 15 we will see a little bit of how to do that. Read with me in verse 15. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" The table was one of the most controversial things about what Jesus did. Mark 2, and a little bit into chapter 3, is telling story after story about Jesus' controversial acts of ministry. In the passage just beforehand, he is going to proclaim forgiveness over someone, which should have been reserved for God alone to be able to do. In the passage that's going to come directly afterwards, the Pharisees are going to ask Jesus why other people are fasting, but Jesus' disciples aren't fasting. Do they not take seriously the word of God? Jesus' disciples in the passage directly after that are going to take some heads of grain while on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees are going to say, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Jesus positions himself in these stories again and again with some moment of controversy. And apparently in the passage we are in today, who Jesus eats with is a moment of significant controversy. And here's what I want you to know. Jesus nor the early church, neither of them backed down from this controversy. If anything, they leaned into it more and more. This apparently is what Jesus was known for. Like elsewhere in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus was apparently known for the who he ate and drank with. This is Luke 7:33-35. For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and you say he has a demon. But the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by all her children. The point that we see here is apparently the rumors that were spreading to try and dismiss the ministry of Jesus was about who he ate with. The table was central to Jesus' ministry. It also became crucially central to the church. When you read the letters of the New Testament, of these leaders writing to the churches about how to follow Jesus faithfully, one of the things that comes up in multiple letters is how they are supposed to eat with one another. Table fellowship. See, in the Jewish system, you wanted to make sure that your table was gathered by people who were considered pure and clean by the standards of the law. But Jesus wanted to gather people around tables. This was a moment of controversy. Note even further, the central image, the symbol that the church was to gather around constantly was not preaching. It was not a stage of worship leaders. The central image was the Lord's Supper. One of the earliest documents we have of the early church is what's called the Didache. We have a little manuscript that you can see on the screen. The Didache was written anywhere between 50 AD and 110 AD, which means it is possible it was written even before some of the documents of the New Testament itself. It is, as far as we can tell, a summary document for Gentile converts about what they are committing to live and believe in as they claim to follow Jesus. The largest chunk of the document is reserved to talking about the Lord's Supper. Here's an excerpt. Every Lord's Day, gather yourselves together. Not just once a month, little Nathan comment. Every Lord's Day, gather yourselves together and break bread. And give thanksgiving after having confessed your transgressions, that your sacrifice may be pure. The Lord's Supper, the table, were the central images of God's people gathering together. How does that look in our day? Well, on a good day for the Lord's Supper, you're going to get a real piece of bread and a real little squeezy thing of juice. And then on a bad day, they're going to be combined into one little package. We don't have a table. That's not how we function. That's not how the Western church operates, gathering around a table, literally breaking bread with one another. Or what about not just like the religious act of the Lord's Supper, but what about just our tables at home? Like our tables have stopped being places where we gather together. Did you know that 46%, nearly half of adult eating occasions are spent totally alone? Not even just like with one other person, not even just on the go in a car, literally by yourself. Our tables are not necessarily known for the consistent meals that we'd eat with a family, with our neighbors, gathering in our community. They're often marked by empty seats, by frantic meals on the go, by rushing from one task to the next, by trying, if you get there, to like drag some sort of interesting conversation out of it. Like, frankly, our table is just like a drop zone for receipts and like snotty baby cloths oftentimes. Our tables are not things that are often as prioritized as it seems to be for Jesus. In fact, I don't know if you've noticed this, and the way architecture is moving is removing the dining room altogether. less and less homes have dining rooms because we know the experience of a dining room that just gathers dust except for like Christmas time and Thanksgiving and then is unused the rest of the space. Like our tables are unused spaces. We don't gather around them. Even on an architectural level, we are designing loneliness into our floor plans. What instead would Jesus do? Well, he would note the importance of the table. This would be his central ministry practice. Note this, the ministry of Jesus involves tables more than techniques. Here's what I mean. In the absence of the relational life of the Western church, what we have gotten really good at is a whole bunch of techniques, be it preaching, be it worship leading, be it music and lighting, be it graphic design. Listen, if you're a new or growing church, you are having serious conversations about marketing. These are the kinds of things that we are prioritizing. We've grown really strong at apologetics. We've given people tools and techniques like 4 spiritual laws or gospel tracts, leading them through the Romans road. Like we have all these techniques. You know what one of the central practices should be if we wanted actually a ministry posture that would be like Jesus? Hospitality. Every single person I know who lives with a deep sense of calling into the mission of God is an incredibly hospitable individual. Their home is not just a place where they can hide off privately. Their home is a ministry space, and specifically their table becomes a gathering place. We have some sense, even without all of the regulations about purity and impurity that were present in Jesus' day, we have some presence of the significance of a table, right? Like it's one thing to grab coffee with someone. It's one thing to connect, like playing basketball with someone. It's an entirely different thing to have them over to your home. I heard someone talk about the marker of deep friendship is what they would call a fridge friend. The kind of person who can walk into your home and open the fridge immediately. And you're kind of scared when they come over because you don't have the budget for it, but you're so happy that you do this. You also know, I confess, when I go to my parents' or in-laws' houses, I'm going straight to their fridge because we are low at food at home, but like their budgets are probably fine, right? Like they can handle it. Anyways, sorry. They're sitting over there. I apologize. I just want I'll say it this way. I was at a conference recently that had world-class preachers and world traveling worship leaders. And I confess, I did encounter God in that space. But Jesus didn't need world traveling worship leaders in order to meet with people. Jesus used a table. In fact, he didn't even use his own table. What does it say? While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house. Sarah and I live in a pretty small place. It's 430 square feet. We would love to host more, but one of the realizations that we have is that our neighbors actually get to host us. That it's actually in building relationships with our neighbors who have homes that are larger, that we can actually step into the kind of ministry that would address loneliness. Here's what you need to know. In this room, many, maybe most of you have walked in longing for more community. You have sensed within you the deep gap of relationship. You have the pain of loneliness carrying over your shoulders. That longing is not going to be addressed in this room. It's just not. You might spark a friendship in this space, but this room, as beautiful as it is to gather in one space, to worship together, to come under the word of God, to pray, where loneliness gets addressed is not going to be here. It will be at a table. It will be in the space where you can actually have deep, relational, slow space to connect, to chat, to listen, to grow. And here's what I'm acknowledging. There is an immense gap between where we are and where I think Jesus would call us to be, right? Like if we're in this space right now where we're just struggling to even have enough time to eat meals, if we're struggling right now to even have our own level of friendships, and we're trying to get up to the place where our tables, or more specifically our neighbors' tables, would be places of divine encounter, We have so many steps to go through. We have to reevaluate, what are our relational priorities? How do I grow in hospitality? Who can I learn from to grow in this? Who can I actually invest enough time in over years that I would actually want to grow, sit with them at a table? We are so far from it. But the reality is, the alternative is a world further funneled into division, hostility, and loneliness. I don't actually know that we have a choice. If you want a world marked not by loneliness, but by not just even community, family, our tables need to once again become places of meeting with strangers, of meeting with friends, and of meeting with the King of all creation. This is the ministry for a lonely world, for our tables to become the ministry zones in our day. And man, is this going to be controversial. Read again in verse 16. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Here is the final contrast that we have for today. The ministry of Jesus is for sinners, not the righteous. And this is the whole point of what Mark has set up in these verses. But here is the danger of how we would interpret this. Jesus didn't come for the healthy, he came for the sick. But all of us are in some way sick. So what we need to acknowledge is that we all each individually need Jesus. Jesus didn't come to call the righteous, he came to call the sinners. But we are all in some way sinners, so the point of Jesus' emphasis is to continue to acknowledge our own sinfulness. And that's fine. Not only is it fine, it's true. That's theologically true. It's just not Jesus' point. The whole reason Jesus is saying this is to explain why he is eating with tax collectors and sinners rather than in the safety of the synagogue sitting with the scribes and the Pharisees. And what I think would happen is if we would take the primary point of these words to be the importance of recognizing our own sinfulness, is that we would unintentionally fall victim to doing the exact same thing the Pharisees are doing. We would take the point of today to be growing in further contemplation of our own sinfulness, of further recognition of what we specifically need, and sitting in the safety of a synagogue-based life, never being propelled out towards the sea. Jesus' point is not just about how we are sinners. You know I have no issue calling you sinners. You are. If you need to know that, you're a sinner. I'm not afraid to say that. That's just not the point right now. The point is, Jesus has a ministry that is propelling people into risky and controversial situations. Our danger is we would be satisfied with wrecking our own sinfulness and never leaving the seats of the synagogue. Let me give you an example of where this gets messy. Because if you're actually willing to have a table-based ministry, if you're actually willing to reach out to strangers, to people who'd be the equivalent of tax collectors and sinners, and gathering them around your table or entering their homes, you are going to be put into some tricky situations. Let me give you an example of one, and I'm even going to let you judge whether or not I handled this situation correctly. A while back, a neighbor of ours was having a birthday party. By the way, what she wanted to do for her birthday was just simply invite her neighborhood. That's a pretty cool table-based ministry for someone who currently has no interest in Jesus. But I was over there was probably a dozen of us. We were celebrating her, and one of the things that eventually comes up is it's time for everyone to take some shots to celebrate the birthday girl. And I clarify, I don't want to take a shot. For me, shots are just you only do them if you want to actually step into some level of drunkenness. So I just clarify, no, I'm not going to do this. And the birthday girl's partner just clarifies, just kind of pulls me aside, hey, I understand why you'd be cautious. I just want you to know, this is just Bailey, so there's only a little bit of alcohol, so I don't think you should be concerned. So now I get put into this place of okay, so on the one hand, I have just established a conviction of some kind of why I don't want to do this. But on the other hand, this guy is trying to step into vulnerable hospitality with me where he's actually trying to take care of me versus according to the kind of alcohol that he actually put out into these shots. So what do? Well, here's what I want you to know. I took the shot. What are you going to do? Fire me? I'm leaving anyways. Now, I am willing to be told that I handled that situation wrong. I look back, I don't know if I did the right thing. But I am frankly uninterested in hearing from you. Hold on. I'm uninterested in hearing from you if you are simply living in the safety of the synagogue and have never once stepped into the controversy of the sea. I will happily listen to you if you are living on the edge and you are in these situations and you would have tried to represent Jesus in a different way. I will happily hear from you. I'm happy to acknowledge that I'm wrong. But I frankly have no interest if you just have this privatized, hidden kind of life off in the distance where you have no engagement in the level of like hospitality and presence in the everyday life of people who are not in the room right now. We do not need more people who spend their entire lives stuck in the synagogue. I believe in the synagogue. I'm a pastor. It's just not the only place where life happens, right? That's obvious. We should know that at this point in time. Let me make this a little bit practical. Some of us are going to have different relational capacities. Some of us are going to be able to do this at a different level, and I just want you to know that's totally okay. I just want to say this. Whatever your relational bandwidth is, some of it needs to be with people who would be by the sea, not currently in the synagogue. So we all have different capacities, right? That's fine. Some of it is based on personality. We have some people who are more introverted versus extroverted. That is fine. Some of it might be the current responsibility that you take at work and how much energy you have when you come back home. That is fine. Some of it might be that you're in a season of needing to be a caretaker for someone who is extremely ill. That is fine. Some of it might be seasonal based on pain or heartache or busyness. Let's be really honest. The weather has something to do with this. Some of you get really sad in wintertime, right? And just a couple weeks ago, you came alive, right? You don't have to tell us that it happened. We know. We see it. It came alive. I'm not looking over here because I'm not looking at my wife, but someone over there this might have just happened to them. That's fine. Your relational capacity can be different based on personality, based on season. That's okay. I'm just saying part of your bandwidth needs to not be restricted to synagogue things. There is a world out there screaming for community, screaming for connection, a sense of loneliness that is just hovering over every step, that doesn't even know the experience of sitting at a table with a friend. And what we would often do is hide in our own safety bubbles rather than running to the sea. I just want to invite you to run to the sea today, to build relationships for the long haul with people who are not going to be showing up in the synagogue, but with people who desperately need ministry that would address the loneliness we feel with one another, but the sense of loneliness and distance that we would feel from God himself.